Welcome to my portfolio about the future of the TV and film industry and the work I've developed in an effort to pursue a role within this industry. My name's Jay, and I aspire to work as a director or screenwriter someday. I'll further develop my reasonings and qualifications for this as this portfolio goes on. So with the constant shifting of cinematic standards and audience approval, film continues to evolve as an art form, growing more complex than anything I thought was possible before. Within this portfolio, I'll present some examples of completed work and the process it took to complete it. I'll have some examples showcasing some of my biggest inspirations in the industry, and I'll conclude by examining how all this has helped me develop the skills necessary to be an effective director. So, without further ado, let's get into it. My first example is my first draft for the script I'll use for my end of the year project, Reflections, a short film. So having concluded and developed my idea over the last module, I've spent the last week writing the full script for this 5-minute short film. The film is in its simplest terms about examining human emotions and how they can make people act. So in this case, how one person can act differently and how their personality and goals can shift as their emotional state changes, and what effect this can have on their surroundings, relationships, and opportunities. Obviously, it's all very much condensed into 5 minutes, but I've made a conscious effort of representing these themes as effectively as I can through not only the dialogue and scripting shown here, but also through the character design and filming. I further worked on how my short film will look by developing a recce for it, as well as a shot list. In the case of the recce, I did my best effort to determine the different shooting locations for the film, as well as establishing the risks and limitations that come along with these. My shot list is an estimation of all the shots I'll use from a pre-production perspective, which is to say I've looked at my script and organized what kind of shots would be used for each scene, where they would be, and how they would be in total. All of this pre-production work is going to be subject to change when the actual production stage comes around, but it builds a basis from which to work on when creating my full film. All this goes to show my planning, organizational, and creative skills as I've developed an early structure for my film beyond the script. Finally, for my final example, I put together the work from both my previous examples into a more practical test by filming one of the scenes from the short film, using myself as the stand-in for the protagonist. The scene's only 40 seconds long, so let's give it a watch and I'll discuss it further.
You! Oh, hi there, Sil. Funny seeing you here. Couldn't believe what my eyes were showing me. The glaring impossibility that must have been the source of all this chaos. It was back. This wasn't the first I'd seen of myself before. A distorted mirror that showed a twisted reflection. Was this the copy they thought more appealing than the genuine article?
Now, while I might not have much of a future in an acting role, this video allowed me to experiment with a variety of production skills that I'll undoubtedly use when I reshoot this scene later with proper actors. I experimented with several different angles in the same locale, practiced with a split screen effect, which I hadn't previously used, and which will be a central key for the short film, and got to further my editing skills. Ultimately, I spent this week working on different skills and aspects of pre-production. In doing this, I hope I've demonstrated a variety of skills I've picked up on throughout this course that'll help me with my career path. So, to talk about some of my inspirations, my first example shows a film that inspired me early on in my career path, and that is the 1965 Academy Award-winning film, Dr. Zhivago. This massive movie capped out at 3 hours and 13 minutes on its original 1965 release, with the re-released version from 1992 bumping this length up to 3 hours and 20 minutes. Now, watching this when I was younger, I had no comparison for a movie like this. Films never really strayed too far beyond the 2-hour mark at most, and this was a slog to get through as a kid. But looking back on it now and rewatching it, I have a much larger appreciation for the scale that director David Lean went for. The movie adapted Boris Pasternak's controversial 1957 book of the same name, which was a scathing critique on the Russian Revolution and particularly the Soviet Union and its new government, as written by a Russian perspective. The social implications of this movie at the time, with the Cold War still fervent, led to it being outlawed in the Soviet Union and praised all over the West. This was a movie that, although being largely grounded with its focus on aspects of war, revolution, and life in a dictatorial regime, was largely stretching the boundaries and going beyond what was considered realistic for cinema at the time. And that was all in large part due to the man highlighted in example 2, and that is director Sir David Lean. Lean left his movie much less critical than the original book in its assessment of the Soviet Union, With romantic sleigh rides, rolling landscapes, and feel-good music, the movie was largely a positive and optimistic movie, aside from a few scenes that focused on the Russian Revolution that didn't really shy away from the horrors of revolution. The remainder of the movie highly revolved on dialogue and the interactions between the characters as opposed to what was happening in the country, examining the life of a few individuals during the revolution that Lean had brought to life through his long paced-out dialogue and romantic subplots. Lean's style of directing stuck with me particularly because of how different it was, and that was my main takeaway from the movie. It felt as though it was a movie plucked out from the future and released 50 or so years earlier than it should be, a point I'll elaborate on a little further down the line. But first, my third example of inspirations, and that's my dream role in the industry. And no surprises here, it is to eventually direct a film and be a fully fledged director. I think most people in the industry aspire to someday be the director, being the person in charge who guides a film through their vision. And although I've considered other roles, this is the grand aspiration for me as of now in the industry. And it's more than just being in charge or doing what you want with a film. I view movies largely as an expression of a director's mind and their own perspectives and ideas. Any screenplay will be adapted differently by a new director. It'll bring a new tone and carry a new message. It's a way of showcasing your own vision and views through a grand medium that can go beyond what's real and blur the lines between what's fictional and what's real to an audience. Your imagination really is the limit, and that's something I admire. But as with any medium, there are challenges in directing. And in film, as highlighted here, one of the largest and latest challenges of the film industry is the purported death of the cinema. So with the COVID-19 pandemic, movie theaters have been largely deserted, and movies have been shifted over to streaming services instead. This shift also means changes to how movies are filmed, who your audiences are, and what platforms it's for. And it's already proven largely challenging, with a variety of directors complaining about the medium shift and opting instead to make more cinematic movies meant to revive cinema going. Now obviously there are more challenges that come with the role, but I felt this was the newest and most affecting of the industry, as I'm essentially walking into a new hybrid industry. So the final example I have of inspirations explores a more recent film that I felt highlights this new age of cinema largely. The movie industry is expanding, and longer movie lengths just keep getting more palatable to audiences. Recent films like Avengers Endgame and Zack Snyder's Justice League stretch the bounds of being around 3 and 4 hours long respectively. But the movie I'm highlighting is the new Dune movie by Denis Villeneuve. Dune is a 2.5-hour sci-fi movie that follows a lot of the aspects that I personally admired about Dr. Zhivago, while still being an entirely different genre. Dune doesn't focus too much on action scenes and instead is fully intended to be a building block for a franchise, with the movie announcing to the viewer early on that it's part one of a larger story. But unlike other franchises where each part has an independent film structure with a beginning, a middle, and an end, Dune doesn't have an end, or much of a middle. It's largely an introduction to the world and the characters, and hints at plot points that might become relevant later on. There is no real climax to the movie other than the main character being forced to flee his home and wandering the desert near the end of the film, and these aspects all largely reminded me of Dr. Zhivago, which did a similar kind of thing, only with a winter wasteland as opposed to a desert one. The visuals were gorgeous and best showed what I think New Age cinema is all about, taking time to let the visuals and the characters shine while letting the story build and develop more organically rather than following traditional story structure. Dune is one movie that does this, but of course isn't the only one. As dialogue and characters become more prioritized in a world in which films are even more accessible and cinematic in nature. This new age of film only expands the grandeur of cinema while expanding the boundaries of stories you can tell, and leaves me very excited for the future of the industry. Having wanted to work in the industry from a young age, I've worked on different aspects and skills of the industry, not limiting myself to one area of work. This is further reflected by the original pieces of work I produced during this module. Through my various work examples I've listed in this portfolio, I've attempted to demonstrate my handle over certain skills, particularly where it comes to copywriting, planning, and filming skills, which have developed gradually through the process of developing my original work. Well, that's all. Thanks for joining me on this vlog. I hope you can see how my interest in the field has grown and developed, and see why I want to pursue a career in this industry, as well as how I've begun working on the necessary skills to be a professional director in the future. Thank you.